He took a bride to fulfill a promise, not expecting she was the woman who'd saved his life years before. A duke bound by honor, an heiress hiding a devastating secret. A marriage that began as duty, but became the love that would destroy them both. Subscribe now, because what starts as obligation ends in the most heartbreaking sacrifice imaginable. The grandfather clock struck midnight as the Duke of Ravenswood entered the darkened study, unaware the letter waiting on his desk would seal both their fates. The letter trembled in Adrian Blackwell's hands, not from the bitter February wind that rattled the windows of Ravenswood Hall, but from the words that seemed to burn through the paper itself. Come at once. Dying. Must see you. James. The Duke of Ravenswood stared at the hurried scrawl, his jaw tightening as guilt twisted in his chest. James Whitmore. The man who had stood beside him through every scandal, every loss, every dark moment when the weight of the Ravenswood title had threatened to crush him entirely. The friend who had lent him money without question when his father's gambling debts had nearly cost them everything. The man he hadn't seen in nearly a year because pride, damned foolish pride, had kept him away. Your Grace, the carriage is ready. His butler's voice cut through the silence. Adrian looked up, meeting the older man's concerned gaze. How bad is the estate, Morrison? The butler hesitated, his weathered face creasing with worry. The tenants are 3 months behind on rent because the harvest failed. The roof in the east wing collapsed last week, and the creditors... He paused. They're circling, Your Grace. Without a significant influx of capital within the next 6 months, we'll lose Ravenswood entirely. 6 generations. The weight of it pressed against Adrian's shoulders like a physical thing. 6 generations of Blackwells who had protected these lands, and he would be the one to lose it all. At 32, he was a duke in title only, a man with an ancient name and empty coffers, watching his legacy crumble around him. I'll be back before dawn, Adrian said, pulling on his greatcoat. The fabric was fine but worn like everything else he owned. Appearances. Always appearances. The Tun could never know just how desperately poor the Duke of Ravenswood had become. The journey to London took 6 hours through frozen roads, and with each passing mile, Adrian's dread deepened. He remembered James as vital, laughing, full of life, a self-made man who'd built a trading empire from nothing, and who'd never cared that society looked down on his merchant origins. James had always said that old money might open doors, but new money built palaces. The Whitmore townhouse blazed with light despite the late hour, and the butler who answered Adrian's knock had tears streaming down his weathered face. Your Grace, thank God you've come. He's been asking for you. Upstairs, second door on the right. Adrian took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering. The scent of sickness hung heavy in the air, laudanum and sweat and something else, something final. He paused outside the door, steeling himself, then pushed it open. The man in the bed bore little resemblance to the robust friend he remembered. James Whitmore had always been larger than life, with a booming laugh and shoulders broad enough to carry the world. Now he seemed to have collapsed in on himself, his face grey, his breathing laboured. But his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, lit up when he saw Adrian in the doorway. "Took you bloody long enough," James rasped, attempting a smile. "Thought I'd have to die without giving you a piece of my mind." Adrian crossed to the bed, pulling up a chair. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I should have come sooner. I should have—" "Stop." James lifted one trembling hand. "No apologies between us. Not now. We don't have time for that." He coughed, and the sound rattled wetly in his chest. "The physicians give me a week at most, probably less." "James, listen to me, Adrian, please." James's fingers gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "I'm dying, and I need to know she'll be safe. My daughter. My Eleanor." Adrian's brow furrowed. He'd never met James's daughter. She'd been away at school, then travelling on the continent. He knew she existed, knew she was James's only child, but little else. "Of course she'll be safe. Your fortune." "My fortune is exactly the problem." James's laugh was bitter. £300,000, Adrian. That's what she'll inherit when I'm gone. £300,000, and she's barely 23 years old, unmarried and completely alone in the world. Do you know what that makes her? An heiress Adrian said quietly. Pray. James's eyes blazed with sudden fury. The moment I'm in the ground, they'll descend on her like vultures. Every fortune hunter, every titled wastrel looking to repair his estates, every calculating mother with a worthless son. They'll lie to her, manipulate her, marry her for her money, and make her miserable for the rest of her life. Adrian's chest tightened because he recognized himself in that description. Wasn't he exactly that kind of man? A titled nobleman with an estate in ruins, desperate for an influx of capital? She's too good, James continued, his voice breaking. Too kind, too trusting. Her mother died when she was 8, and I've protected her ever since, maybe too well. She sees the best in people, Adrian. She won't recognize the predators until it's too late. You have solicitors, trustees. I have a will that makes her one of the wealthiest women in England, and that's not protection. It's a target on her back. James struggled to sit up, and Adrian helped him, adjusting the pillows. I need someone I trust, someone with honor, someone who will protect her not because of what she's worth, but because I'm asking. The words hung in the air between them, and Adrian's blood ran cold as he realized what James was asking. You want me to marry her? I want you to save her. James's eyes bored into his. I know what you're facing with Ravenswood. Morrison writes to me, tells me everything. The debts, the repairs, the creditors. You need money, and Eleanor needs protection. It's perfect. Perfect. Adrian's laugh was hollow. Perfect for me, perhaps. I get a fortune to save my estate. What does she get? A husband who married her for her money. She gets you. James gripped his hand tighter. A man who won't squander her fortune on gambling or mistresses. A man who knows what it means to be responsible for something greater than himself. A man who won't break her heart because you're honest enough to admit this is about necessity. His breathing grew more labored. Promise me, Adrian. Promise me you'll marry her, protect her, keep her safe from the bastards who'll see her as nothing but a dowry. Adrian stared at his friend's desperate face, and the weight of 6 generations pressed down on him again. Ravenswood, his tenants, his duty, and now this, a dying man's plea. James, she deserves better than a marriage of convenience. She deserves someone she deserves to be safe. James coughed again, harder this time, and blood flecked his lips. Please, Adrian, you're the only man I trust, the only one. Promise me. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, London slept, unaware that in this room 2 men were negotiating the future of a woman neither of them was asking. Adrian thought of Eleanor Whitmore, this woman he'd never met. 23 years old, an orphan about to lose her last parent. £300,000 that would make her a prize to be won, a commodity to be traded. And he thought of Ravenswood, the tenant families who depended on him, the legacy he was about to lose, the crushing weight of failure. I'll do it, he heard himself say. I promise. The relief that flooded James's face was almost painful to witness. Thank you, God, thank you. He sank back against the pillows. She's arriving tomorrow from Bath. I've told her about you, told her you're a man of honor. The wedding should happen quickly, before He couldn't finish. Where is she now? Adrian asked. At my sister's house in Bath. I sent her away 2 months ago when the illness worsened. Couldn't bear for her to watch me deteriorate. James's eyes drifted closed. She's a good girl, Adrian. Clever, kind. She reads philosophy and plays the pianoforte beautifully. She'll make a fine duchess, even if the circumstances aren't what either of you would have chosen. A fine duchess. Adrian wondered what this Eleanor Whitmore thought of the arrangement. Had James told her? Had she agreed? Or was she, like him, being swept along by duty and circumstance? Rest now, Adrian said, standing. I'll be here when she arrives. But James's hand shot out, gripping his wrist again. One more thing, there's a clause in the will. She must be married within 3 months of my death, or the fortune goes to my brother's sons, a pack of worthless gamblers who'll drain it dry within a year. So you see, you're not just doing this for me, you're doing it for her. 3 months. Adrian felt the trap close around him completely. He'd given his word to a dying man, and honor demanded he keep it, even if it meant marrying a stranger, even if it meant building a life on a foundation of obligation rather than love. He stayed at James's bedside through the night, watching his friend drift in and out of consciousness. As dawn began to paint the London sky pink and gold, James stirred one last time. "Adrian, I'm here. Don't make her miserable." The words were barely a whisper. "I know this isn't a love match, but don't make her miserable. She's already lost so much." "I won't," Adrian promised, though he had no idea how to keep such a vow. James smiled faintly. "Good. That's good." His eyes closed. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. Tell her." This was the only way I knew to keep her safe. The sun rose fully over London, casting golden light through the bedroom windows. Carriages began to rattle through the streets below. Servants moved quietly through the house, their footsteps muffled, their voices hushed. And at 8:30, as Adrian sat numbly beside his sleeping friend, the butler appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, Miss Whitmore's carriage has arrived." Adrian's heart lurched. "Already?" "She made excellent time from Bath, sir. Shall I show her up?" He looked at James, still sleeping, his breathing shallow but steady. "Give me a moment." Adrian stood, moving to the window. Below, a handsome carriage had stopped in front of the townhouse, and even from this height he could see a young woman descending. Her travelling cloak was deep blue, her bonnet obscuring her face, but there was something in the way she moved, a grace, a purpose, that caught his attention. This was Eleanor Whitmore, the woman he'd promised to marry, the stranger who held his future, and the future of Ravenswood in her hands. She paused on the doorstep, looking up at the house, and for just a moment he could have sworn she looked directly at his window. Even from this distance, he felt the weight of that gaze. Then she disappeared inside, and Adrian heard footsteps on the stairs, quick, light, hurried. The footsteps of someone rushing to a dying father's bedside. The door burst open, and Eleanor Whitmore swept into the room, pulling off her bonnet and gloves. Adrian turned from the window, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too strong, her jaw too determined, her eyebrows too dark and expressive. But there was something arresting about her, an intelligence in her grey eyes, a vitality in the way she moved, a presence that filled the room. And then those grey eyes met his, and Adrian felt something shift in his chest. A strange recognition, as if he'd seen her before, though he knew they'd never met. "Father." She moved to the bed, not sparing Adrian another glance, her attention entirely focused on James. "Papa, I'm here. I came as fast as I could." James's eyes opened, and his face transformed with joy and sorrow mingled together. "Eleanor, my darling girl." She took his hand, and Adrian saw tears streaming down her face. "You should have told me sooner. You should have let me come home." "Couldn't bear it," James whispered. "Couldn't bear to have you watch. But I'm glad you're here now." His eyes shifted to Adrian. "Eleanor, there's someone I need you to meet. Someone very important." Eleanor finally turned to look at Adrian fully, and he saw her stiffen. Those grey eyes widened and something flashed across her face. Surprise? Recognition? Fear? It was gone too quickly for him to identify. "This is Adrian Blackwell, the Duke of Ravenswood," James said. "My oldest friend, the man I trust more than anyone in the world." Adrian bowed slightly. "Miss Whitmore, Your Grace." Her voice was low, melodious, but there was a tremor in it. She looked back at her father. "Papa, what is this about?" James's grip tightened on both their hands. "I've asked the Duke to marry you, Eleanor, and he's agreed." The colour drained from her face. "What? I know it's sudden, but please trust me. This is the only way I can keep you safe. The Duke is a man of honour. He'll protect you from the fortune hunters. Papa, you can't be serious." Eleanor pulled her hand free, standing. "You can't just arrange my marriage like I'm a piece of property." "I can, and I have." James struggled to sit up. "The will stipulates you must marry within 3 months of my death, or everything goes to your cousins. I won't have you left vulnerable, Eleanor. I won't have you preyed upon by men who see only your fortune." She turned to Adrian, her eyes blazing. "And you agreed to this? You agreed to marry a woman you've never met for her money?" The accusation stung because it was true. Adrian met her gaze steadily. "Your father asked me to protect you. I gave him my word." "How noble." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. a penniless duke swooping in to save the helpless heiress. Tell me, Your Grace, what's the going rate for nobility these days? £50,000, 100, Eleanor? James's voice was sharp. No, Papa. You're asking me to marry a stranger. I deserve to know what kind of man he is. She turned back to Adrian. Are you in debt, Your Grace? He could have lied, could have hedged, but something in those grey eyes demanded honesty. Yes. How much? Enough that without a significant influx of capital, I'll lose my estate within 6 months. And my fortune would solve that problem nicely, wouldn't it? It would save Ravenswood, yes. It would save the 50 families who depend on those lands. It would preserve 6 generations of history. Adrian took a step closer. But your father didn't ask me to marry you because I need money, Miss Whitmore. He asked me because he trusts me to treat you with respect and honor, which is more than can be said for the dozens of fortune hunters who will pursue you the moment the mourning period ends. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you're James's daughter, that's enough. It's not enough for a marriage. It will have to be. Adrian's voice was firm but not unkind. Because I've given my word to a dying man and I will keep it. They stared at each other, and Adrian could see the war raging behind those grey eyes, fury and fear and grief all tangled together. Finally she turned back to her father. How long? She asked quietly. How long do the physicians give you? James's face crumpled. Days, my darling. A week at most. Eleanor sank into the chair beside the bed, all the fight draining out of her. And this is truly what you want? You want me to marry this man? I want you to be safe. I want you to be protected. I want you to have the life your mother and I always dreamed for you. James took her hand again. Adrian is a good man, Eleanor, I swear it. He'll honor you. He'll keep you from harm. And perhaps in time, you might even find some happiness together. Eleanor looked at Adrian again, and this time the anger had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like sorrow. Do you promise to be kind to me, Your Grace? Even if this marriage is built on nothing but necessity. The question pierced him. I promise. Then I'll do it. She turned back to her father. For you, Papa. Because you're asking. But don't expect me to be happy about it. James's relief was palpable. That's all I ask, my darling. That's all I ask. Adrian watched as father and daughter held each other, and he felt like an intruder in this moment of grief. But he couldn't look away from Eleanor Whitmore, this fierce, intelligent woman who'd just agreed to marry a stranger to honor her dying father's wishes. She had no idea who he truly was, no idea of the promises he'd made or the debts that haunted him. And he had no idea who she was beneath the anger and the grief. But in 1 week they would be husband and wife, bound together by duty, necessity, and the last wish of a dying man. As the morning light grew stronger, Adrian wondered if James was right. Could 2 strangers find happiness in a marriage built on such a foundation? Or had he just condemned them both to a lifetime of regret? Eleanor's eyes met his across the bed, and in their grey depths he saw the same question reflected back at him. Only time would tell. James Whitmore died 3 days later, slipping away peacefully in his sleep with Eleanor holding one hand and Adrian holding the other. The funeral was a grand affair. Half of London's merchant class turned out to pay their respects to a man who'd built an empire from nothing, though the aristocracy was notably absent. They never quite forgave James for having the audacity to be richer than most of them combined. Adrian stood beside Eleanor throughout the service, watching as she maintained perfect composure, her face pale but dry-eyed behind her black veil. She didn't cry during the eulogy, didn't falter when they lowered the casket into the ground. Only when the last mourner had departed, and they returned to the silent townhouse, did he see her hands shaking as she removed her gloves. "Miss Whitmore," he began, but she held up one trembling hand. "Please don't. Not today." Her voice was raw, barely above a whisper. "I've smiled and accepted condolences and pretended to be strong for hours. I just can't anymore." She walked up the stairs without another word, leaving Adrian alone in the entrance hall with the grandfather clock ticking loudly in the silence. He understood. Grief needed privacy, needed space to breathe. He would give her that. But as he turned to leave, The butler approached, carrying a sealed envelope. "Mr. Whitmore's solicitor asked me to give you this, Your Grace. He said it was urgent." Hadrian broke the seal and read quickly. His jaw tightened. The reading of the will was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and both he and Eleanor were required to attend. The marriage clause would be made official. The clock would start ticking. 3 months, 90 days to turn a grieving stranger into his duchess. The next morning, Adrian arrived at the solicitor's office on Chancery Lane to find Eleanor already there, seated in a high-backed chair near the window. She'd exchanged her mourning veil for a simple black dress, and in the morning light he could see the shadows beneath her eyes. She hadn't slept. "Miss Whitmore." He bowed. "Your Grace." Her voice was carefully neutral. The solicitor, a thin man named Pemberton with wire-rimmed spectacles, shuffled papers nervously. "Shall we begin? I know these matters are delicate." "Please," Eleanor said. "The sooner we understand the terms, the better." Pemberton cleared his throat and began reading. James's will was straightforward in most respects. The townhouse in London, the country estate in Kent, various investments and holdings, all left to Eleanor. But then came the clause that made her stiffen in her chair. "My daughter, Eleanor Whitmore, must contract a legal marriage within 3 months of my death. Should she fail to do so, or should she marry against the recommendation of my appointed trustee?" Pemberton glanced at Adrian. "Being Adrian Blackwell, the Duke of Ravenswood, the entirety of her inheritance shall pass to my nephews, Thomas and William Hartley, in equal shares." "Appointed trustee?" Eleanor's voice was sharp. "My father made the Duke my trustee. Until your marriage, yes. At which point your husband will assume legal control of your assets, as is customary." Pemberton adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Whitmore was quite specific in his wishes, Miss Whitmore. He wanted to ensure you had protection during this vulnerable period." Eleanor stood abruptly, moving to the window. Her back was rigid, her shoulders tight. "So not only must I marry within 3 months, but I must marry a man my father selected or lose everything. The Duke of Ravenswood specifically, yes." Pemberton looked apologetic. "I did advise Mr. Whitmore that such terms were unusual, but he was adamant." Adrian watched emotions play across Eleanor's profile: anger, grief, frustration. He spoke carefully. "The terms are restrictive, I'll grant you, but your father's intentions were protective, not punitive." She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes made him take a step back. Were they? Or did he simply decide that a woman couldn't be trusted with her own fortune? That I needed a man, a duke no less, to manage my affairs? "That's not fair," Adrian said quietly. "You know your father. He loved you. Everything he did was to control my future from beyond the grave." Her voice rose, then broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth, visibly struggling for composure. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, but thick with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. Please excuse me." She swept from the room before either man could respond. Hadrian moved to follow, but Pemberton stopped him. "Your Grace, there's more. Provisions Mr. Whitmore wanted kept private until after the funeral." The solicitor's face was grave. "The marriage must produce an heir within 2 years of the wedding date, or Miss Whitmore's fortune reverts to the Hartley cousins. Furthermore, should the Duke predecease Miss Whitmore without issue, she retains only a widow's portion, 1/3 of the estate. The remainder passes to the Hartley line." Adrian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He wanted to ensure the continuation of his bloodline. "More than that, Your Grace. He wanted to ensure Miss Whitmore would be cared for, protected, settled. He believed a husband and children would give her security, purpose." Pemberton removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly. "Between you and me, I think Mr. Whitmore feared his daughter's independence. She's remarkably intelligent, you see. Well-read. She has opinions on matters most women aren't expected to consider. He worried that without proper guidance she might become difficult to manage." The words rankled. Adrian had known James for 15 years, had always admired his progressive views, his willingness to defy convention. But this, binding his daughter's inheritance to marriage and childbearing, seemed to contradict everything James had claimed to believe. "Did she know?" Adrian asked. "About the heir requirement?" Mr. Whitmore intended to tell her before the wedding. He felt the shock of it combined with his death would be too much to bear at once. Adrian's hands clenched. So I'm to tell her, to explain that not only must she marry me, but she must bear my children or lose everything her father built. You are her trustee, Your Grace. The responsibility falls to you. Pemberton gathered his papers. I've prepared the settlement documents. Once you and Miss Whitmore agree to the marriage terms, we can proceed with the engagement announcement. Given the 3-month deadline, I'd recommend the wedding take place within 6 weeks. That allows for a brief engagement period without appearing indecently hasty. 6 weeks. 42 days to convince Eleanor Whitmore to bind herself to him, not just legally but biologically, to trust him with her body, her future, her father's legacy. Adrian left the solicitor's office and found Eleanor standing on the street corner, staring unseeing at the passing traffic. He approached slowly, giving her time to compose herself. I apologize for my outburst, she said without looking at him. It was childish, it was honest. He stood beside her, watching a flower seller hawk her wares across the street. You have every right to be angry. Do I? She turned to face him, and her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. My father is dead. I'm alone in the world. And I'm being forced into a marriage with a man I don't know to protect a fortune I never asked for. Tell me, Your Grace, what exactly am I supposed to feel? The question hung between them, raw and real. Adrian had spent 3 days thinking of nothing but duty, obligation, the promises he'd made. He hadn't considered what this must feel like from her perspective, to lose your last parent and your freedom in the same breath. I can't tell you what to feel, he said carefully, but I can tell you what I intend. I will honor my promise to your father. I will protect your inheritance and your reputation. I will treat you with respect and courtesy, and I will never— He paused, choosing his words with precision. I will never force you into anything you're not willing to give. She studied his face, those grey eyes searching for something, truth, perhaps, or deception. There's more to the will, isn't there? Something Pemberton didn't say in front of me. Adrian's stomach tightened. She was perceptive. Too perceptive. Yes. Tell me. He could have deflected, could have claimed attorney-client privilege or said it wasn't the right time. But something in her direct gaze demanded honesty. If this marriage was to have any foundation at all, it couldn't be built on lies. Your father's will stipulates that we must produce an heir within 2 years of our wedding date, he said quietly. If we fail to do so, or if I die without issue, your inheritance passes to the Hartley cousins. The color drained from her face. She swayed slightly, and Adrian instinctively reached out to steady her, but she stepped back, refusing his touch. An heir. Her voice was hollow. He's requiring me to bear children to keep my own money. Eleanor. Miss Whitmore, she corrected sharply. We are not familiar enough for Christian names, Your Grace. Miss Whitmore, he amended. I know how this sounds, but your father wanted— My father wanted to control me even from the grave. She pressed her hands to her temples. Marriage, children, all on a timeline like I'm breeding stock. Tell me honestly, did you know about this requirement when you agreed to marry me? No. Pemberton only just told me. And now that you know— She dropped her hands, meeting his gaze with fierce intensity. Now that you understand what's required, not just a marriage of convenience, but a breeding arrangement, do you still intend to go through with it? Adrian could have lied, could have claimed noble intentions or pretended the fortune didn't matter. But she'd asked for honesty and she deserved it. I gave my word to a dying man, he said. And yes, I need your fortune to save Ravenswood. Those facts haven't changed. But I meant what I said. I won't force you into anything. If we marry and if we fulfill that aspect of the agreement, it will be because you choose it, not because you're coerced. How generous, she said bitterly. The Duke will only claim his husbandly rights if his wife consents. What a modern arrangement. Would you prefer I lie? Adrian's patience was fraying. Pretend this is a love match? Claim I'm marrying you for anything other than necessity? I'd prefer you didn't marry me at all. The words burst from her. I'd prefer my father had trusted me to manage my own life. I'd prefer not to be standing here discussing heirs and obligations with a man I met 4 days ago. Then don't marry me. Adrian's voice was flat. Refuse the terms. Let the fortune go to your cousins. Live on whatever you can earn independently, and watch everything my father built get squandered by Thomas and William Hartley." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They're gamblers and wastrels. They'd drain the fortune dry within a year and leave his legacy in ruins. I can't." Her voice broke. "I won't let that happen. It's all I have left of him." The admission cost her. Adrian could see it in the way her shoulders bowed, the way she wrapped her arms around herself as if physically holding the pieces together. "Then we're both trapped," he said quietly. "Both doing what we must rather than what we want." She looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, but understanding perhaps. Recognition that they were both pawns in a game neither had chosen to play. "6 weeks," she said finally. "Pemberton said we should marry within 6 weeks. That's his recommendation, yes. And in those 6 weeks we're expected to—" "What? Court? Pretend this is normal?" "We're expected to become acquainted," Adrian said. "To learn enough about each other that our marriage doesn't seem like a complete farce to society." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. If we're to do this, we should do it properly. I'll need to move into the townhouse. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to stay at Papa's house unchaperoned. You'll need to call on me daily. We'll attend events together during the season. Let society see us as a matched pair." Her voice was businesslike, practical, as if she were planning a business merger rather than a wedding. Perhaps, Adrian thought, that's exactly what this was. "I'll arrange for my aunt to serve as your chaperone," he offered. "Lady Millicent is unconventional, but she's respected enough to lend propriety. That would be acceptable." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, and Adrian could see her rebuilding the walls he'd briefly glimpsed beyond. "I have conditions, Your Grace." "Name them." "First, I want complete transparency about your debts. If I'm to save Ravenswood, I need to know exactly what we're facing." "Agreed." "Second, I want a voice in how my fortune is spent. I won't be relegated to pin money and dress allowances while you make all financial decisions." That gave him pause. By law, everything she owned would become his upon marriage. She'd have no legal right to control her own money. But the steel in her eyes told him this wasn't negotiable. "We'll work together," he said carefully. "I can't promise equal control. The law doesn't allow it, but I promise to consult you on major decisions. That will have to do." She took a breath. "Third, and this is critical, I want time. We have 2 years to produce an heir, yes, but I won't be rushed into the physical aspects of marriage. I need to trust you first." Adrian felt relief wash through him. He'd been dreading that conversation, dreading the thought of touching her when she looked at him with such wariness. "You have my word? We'll move at whatever pace you're comfortable with. Then we have an agreement." She extended her hand and he took it, feeling the tremor she was trying to hide. "In 6 weeks I'll become the Duchess of Ravenswood, and we'll both pray that your honor is as strong as my father believed." They stood on the London street, hands clasped, 2 strangers binding themselves to a future neither wanted, but both were too honorable to refuse. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said softly. "Something I need to tell you before we go any further." Adrian's chest tightened at the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, conflict playing across her features. Finally, she shook her head. "No, not today. I've already endured too much. But soon, Your Grace. Soon I'll tell you everything." She pulled her hand free and walked away, leaving Adrian standing on the corner with more questions than answers. What secret did Eleanor Whitmore carry? What was she so desperate and so afraid to tell him? The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of social obligations and careful choreography. Adrian called on Eleanor every afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock, always with his Aunt Millicent in attendance. They took tea in the drawing room of the Whitmore townhouse, making stilted conversation while society watched and whispered. But slowly, incrementally, the stiffness between them began to ease. Adrian learned that Eleanor read philosophy, not just the acceptable text for young ladies but Kant and Locke and Mill. That she had opinions on trade policy and foreign affairs that would have shocked most of the ton. That she played the pianoforte beautifully, but only when she thought no one was listening. That she took her tea with milk but no sugar, and that she had a wicked sense of humor that occasionally broke through her careful composure. Eleanor learned that Adrian rose before dawn to review estate reports, that he'd taught himself accounting to understand his father's debts, that he remembered every tenant family by name and circumstance, that he read poetry but claimed it was merely to improve his classical education, that he had a younger sister married to a country squire, and that the guilt of not being able to provide her with a proper dowry still haunted him. They were careful with each other, polite, cordial. But beneath the surface, Adrian felt something growing. Not love, certainly not yet, but perhaps the beginning of respect, of understanding. And sometimes, when Eleanor smiled at something he said, or when their hands brushed accidentally while turning pages of a book, Adrian felt a spark of something else, something that had nothing to do with duty or inheritance, and everything to do with the intelligent, complicated woman slowly emerging from behind her defensive walls. The engagement announcement appeared in the Times on a Thursday morning. By that evening, the invitations had started pouring in, dinner parties, soirees, musicales, all designed to display the newly engaged couple to society's scrutinizing gaze. They attended a ball at the Marchioness of Pemberton's townhouse, and Adrian watched Eleanor navigate the social waters with surprising skill. She was gracious to the matrons who congratulated her, charming to the young ladies who'd been her schoolmates, and devastatingly polite to the fortune hunters who'd lost their chance. But he noticed how her smile never quite reached her eyes, how her hands trembled slightly when older gentlemen looked at her too long, too intently, how she stayed close to him, as if his presence offered protection. "You're doing well," he murmured as they stood at the refreshment table. "Society approves. Society approves of your title and my fortune," she corrected. "Whether they approve of us individually is irrelevant." "Cynical, Miss Whitmore, realistic, Your Grace." She accepted a glass of champagne. "They're already calculating how soon we'll produce an heir to secure the Ravenswood line. I heard Lady Thornby wagering it would be within the year." Adrian's jaw tightened. People should mind their own affairs. People are always interested in where money and titles intersect. She took a sip of champagne, her eyes scanning the ballroom. Then she stiffened, her glass frozen halfway to her lips. "What is it?" Adrian followed her gaze. A man had entered the ballroom, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of easy charm that drew attention. He was speaking with the host, but his eyes swept the room and landed on Eleanor with unmistakable recognition. The color drained from her face. "I need air," she said quickly. "Please excuse me." She set down her glass and moved toward the terrace doors with quick, precise steps that looked casual, but Adrian recognized as barely controlled flight. He moved to follow, but a hand on his arm stopped him. "Your Grace." It was the dark-haired man, now standing directly in his path. Lord Marcus Fairfax. "I don't believe we've been introduced." Adrian's instincts prickled. Lord Fairfax. I couldn't help but notice Miss Whitmore seemed distressed. Fairfax's smile didn't reach his eyes. "An old friend. I was hoping to pay my respects, offer my congratulations on your engagement. That's kind of you." Adrian kept his voice neutral, but every instinct screamed that this man was dangerous. "If you'll excuse me." "Of course. Though perhaps you should know." Fairfax leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Miss Whitmore and I have a complicated history. I'd hate for you to enter this marriage without understanding exactly who you're marrying." Adrian's blood went cold. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying nothing, Your Grace, merely stating facts. 5 years ago, Miss Whitmore and I were quite close. Her father disapproved, of course. A mere baron's son wasn't suitable for his precious heiress. He sent her to Bath rather abruptly. I always wondered what might have happened if she'd stayed." The words were carefully chosen, deliberately ambiguous. Adrian wanted to plant his fist in Fairfax's smug face, but they were in the middle of a ballroom, and creating a scene would only feed the gossip mill. "The past is the past," Adrian said coldly. "Eleanor chose to accept my proposal. That's all that matters, did she? Choose, I mean." Fairfax's smile sharpened. "Or was she cornered by her father's will into a marriage she never wanted? Because from where I'm standing, the timing seems remarkably convenient. James dies, you appear, and suddenly the grieving heiress has a duke for a husband. One can't help but wonder about the arrangement. You're out of line. Am I? Or am I the only one honest enough to say what everyone's thinking?" Fairfax straightened his cuffs. "Enjoy your engagement, Your Grace. But don't be surprised if your bride has a few secrets she hasn't shared. Eleanor always was good at keeping things hidden." He walked away, leaving Adrian standing alone with ice in his veins and questions burning through his mind. What history did Eleanor and Fairfax share? Why had she fled at the sight of him? And what secrets was she keeping? He found her on the terrace, gripping the stone balustrade so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't turn when he approached, but he saw her shoulders tense. "Lord Fairfax seems to know you well," Adrian said carefully. "He doesn't know me at all." Her voice was tight. "He knew who my father was, what I was worth, that's all any of them ever knew. Eleanor, I'd like to go home." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Please, Adrian, I can't do this tonight." It was the first time she'd used his given name. The intimacy of it, combined with the raw pain in her voice, made his decision easy. "Of course, I'll call for the carriage." They rode back to her townhouse in silence, the tension thick enough to cut. When they arrived, Adrian helped her down and she paused, her hand still in his. "The thing I said I needed to tell you," she whispered. "It's about 5 years ago. About Marcus Fairfax and a night that changed everything. I need you to know the truth before we marry, but I'm so afraid." Her voice broke. "I'm so afraid of what you'll think of me." Adrian's heart twisted. He lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture of comfort rather than romance. "Whatever happened, whatever you need to tell me, it won't change my commitment to you. We made an agreement, Eleanor. I intend to honor it." She searched his face, and something in his expression must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, then. Come at 2 o'clock. Aunt Millicent can wait in the drawing room, but I need to speak with you alone. I need to tell you everything." "Tomorrow," he agreed. He watched her disappear into the townhouse, and a strange foreboding settled over him. Tomorrow, Eleanor would share her secrets. And Adrian had the sinking feeling that whatever she revealed would change everything he thought he knew about this arrangement, and about the woman he'd agreed to marry. The engagement that had seemed straightforward was becoming increasingly complex, and the bride he'd expected to be a simple solution to his problems was turning out to be a mystery that grew deeper with every passing day. What had happened 5 years ago? What role had Marcus Fairfax played? And why did Eleanor look at Adrian sometimes with an expression he couldn't quite name, something that looked almost like recognition? Tomorrow would bring answers. Adrian only hoped he was ready for them. Adrian arrived at the Whitmore townhouse at precisely 2 o'clock, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the climb up the front steps. He'd barely slept, his mind churning through possibilities. What could Eleanor possibly need to tell him that required such secrecy? What connection did she have to Marcus Fairfax that still held such power over her? The butler showed him to the drawing room where Aunt Millicent sat with her embroidery, her sharp eyes taking in his tension with a knowing look. "She's waiting for you in the library," Millicent said. "And Adrian, whatever she tells you, remember that girl has been through hell these past weeks. She deserves kindness." He found Eleanor standing by the library window, her back to the door, her posture rigid. She wore a simple day dress of grey, still in mourning, and her hair was pulled back severely as if she were armouring herself for battle. "Eleanor." He closed the door behind him, leaving it open just a crack for propriety's sake. She turned, and he was struck by how pale she was, how shadows pooled beneath her eyes. "Thank you for coming. I know this is irregular. You said you had something to tell me." Adrian remained near the door, giving her space. "Something about 5 years ago." "Yes." She pressed her hands together, and he could see them trembling. "5 years ago, I was 18. My father had just completed a particularly lucrative shipping contract, and we were celebrating the season in London. I was naive, sheltered. I'd spent most of my life in boarding schools or traveling with governesses. I didn't understand how society worked, didn't understand what my fortune made me." She moved to the fireplace, staring into the cold grate, as if seeing the past in its ashes. "Marcus Fairfax was everything I thought a gentleman should be. Charming, attentive, well-read. He quoted poetry and took me riding in Hyde Park. He made me feel seen, heard, important. Not as James Whitmore's daughter or as an heiress, but as Eleanor. Just Eleanor." Adrian's chest tightened. He'd suspected a romance, but hearing the softness in her voice when she spoke of Fairfax made something dark and unfamiliar coil in his gut. Jealousy. Ridiculous, given the circumstances, but undeniable. My father disapproved from the start, Eleanor continued. He said Fairfax was a fortune hunter, that his family's estate was mortgaged to the hilt, that he was courting me for my money. But I was 18 and in love, and I was certain my father was wrong. She took a shaking breath. One night there was a ball at Devonshire House. Fairfax asked me to walk with him in the gardens. I went, despite knowing it was improper, despite my chaperone's warnings. I was so sure he was going to propose, you see, so certain that we would prove my father wrong, that our love was real. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. He knew where this was heading, could see it in the way Eleanor's voice had gone flat, mechanical. Instead, I found 3 of his friends waiting in the gardens, gentlemen all of them, sons of earls and viscounts. They had a wager, you see. Fairfax had bet them that he could compromise me so thoroughly that my father would have no choice but to accept the marriage. The dowry would settle his debts, and he'd be set for life. Eleanor, Adrian started forward, but she held up a hand. Let me finish, please. If I stop now, I won't have the courage to continue. She wrapped her arms around herself. They didn't. It didn't go as far as it could have, because someone intervened. She turned to face him fully, and her grey eyes were bright with tears. A man appeared out of nowhere. He fought all 4 of them, Fairfax and his friends. I'd never seen anything like it. He was outnumbered, but he fought like a demon. He took a knife wound to the shoulder, another to the ribs, but he didn't stop until they fled. Adrian's blood had gone cold, a knife wound, to the shoulder and ribs. 5 years ago. The man saved my life, Eleanor whispered. Saved my reputation, my future, everything. And then he collapsed from blood loss. I screamed for help, and when the footmen came running, I begged them to fetch a doctor to save him. But he was delirious from pain and loss of blood. He kept saying he had to get back to Ravenswood, that his tenants needed him, that he couldn't die because too many people depended on him. The library seemed to tilt around Adrian. Ravenswood, 5 years ago. A night he barely remembered through the haze of pain and laudanum. I stayed with him while the doctor worked, Eleanor continued, tears now streaming down her face. I held his hand while they stitched the wounds, and when he finally fell unconscious, I kissed his forehead and promised I would never forget what he'd done for me. You, Adrian breathed. It was you. When he woke 3 days later, he had no memory of that night. The doctor said the head injury and blood loss had stolen it from him. And She swallowed hard. I was a coward. My father had already sent Fairfax and his friends fleeing to the continent with threats of legal action. The scandal was buried, and I convinced myself that the man who saved me was better off not knowing. That if he knew I was the foolish girl who'd nearly been ruined in Devonshire's gardens, he'd think less of me. Adrian's mind was reeling. He'd woken in his London rooms with no memory of how he'd gotten there, with wounds that had taken months to heal properly. His valet had claimed he'd been set upon by thieves, that Adrian had been found bleeding in an alley. It had seemed plausible enough, and with no memory of that night, Adrian had accepted the explanation. But it had been Eleanor. He'd saved Eleanor Whitmore. My father knew, Eleanor said. He visited you while you recovered, pretended to be a concerned friend who'd heard about the attack. You didn't remember him, didn't remember any of us. And he swore me to secrecy. He said that telling you would only complicate matters, that you were a duke with responsibilities, and I was a girl who'd made a terrible mistake. He said the kindest thing we could do was let you forget. She moved toward him, her hands outstretched. But I never forgot. I followed your life from a distance. I knew when you struggled with your father's debts. I knew when your sister married. I knew when Ravenswood started to crumble, and it killed me that I couldn't help you, couldn't repay the debt I owed. Debt. Adrian's voice was hoarse. Eleanor, you don't owe me. I owe you everything. The words burst from her. You nearly died saving me from my own stupidity. You took wounds that could have killed you, and you did it for a stranger. A foolish, naive girl you'd never even met. I don't remember, Adrian said, and the admission felt like a confession of failure. I don't remember you or that night or any of it. I know. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. And when you walked into my father's sick room and I saw you again for the first time in 5 years, I thought I would die from the shock of it. You were standing there agreeing to marry me, and you had no idea who I was. No idea that I'd spent 5 years thinking about you, worrying about you, wishing I could tell you the truth. She was close enough to touch now, and Adrian could see the anguish in every line of her face. When my father asked you to marry me, he wasn't just protecting me from fortune hunters. He was repaying the debt he felt our family owed you. He was giving me to the man who saved my life, the man I'd never been able to forget. Adrian's world had narrowed to this moment, this revelation. Everything he thought he understood about their engagement had just been rewritten. Why didn't you tell me immediately? That first day? Because I was terrified. Eleanor's voice broke. Terrified you'd think I'd manipulated my father into this arrangement. Terrified you'd believe I was using your sacrifice to trap you into marriage. Terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd see me as that stupid 18-year-old girl who nearly got herself ruined instead of the woman I've tried to become. Eleanor. And then last night, when Marcus appeared, she pressed her hands to her face. I saw him and I was 18 again. I was that girl who'd been so easily fooled, so desperate to be loved that she walked straight into a trap. And I realized that if I didn't tell you the truth now, if I let us marry with this secret between us, I'd never forgive myself. Adrian stood frozen, his mind racing through every interaction they'd had since that first meeting. The way she'd looked at him with recognition he'd dismissed as grief. The way she'd sometimes watched him as if memorizing his features. The way she'd agreed to marry a stranger despite her obvious reluctance. It hadn't been a stranger, not to her. Say something, Eleanor whispered. Please, tell me you don't hate me for keeping this from you. Adrian moved then, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. He took her face in his hands, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. I could never hate you, he said fiercely. Never. Do you understand? You were 18 years old and nearly assaulted by men who should have protected you. Whatever choices you made that night, whatever happened after, none of it was your fault. But I should have told you sooner, perhaps. But you're telling me now, and that takes more courage than I think you realize. His thumbs brushed away her tears. I'm not angry, Eleanor. I'm in awe of you. She let out a choked laugh. Awe? I've just admitted to being a foolish girl who nearly got you killed. No, you've just told me that the woman I'm about to marry is the same woman I risked my life to save 5 years ago. A woman worth fighting for even when I had no idea who she was. Adrian's voice softened. Don't you see? If I thought you were worth dying for when you were a stranger, how much more must you be worth now that I'm beginning to know you? Eleanor stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. The fear faded, replaced by wonder and something else. Something that made Adrian's heart race. You really mean that? She breathed. I do. He realized he was still holding her face, his hands cradling her jaw. And he should step back, should restore propriety, but he couldn't make himself move. I wish I could remember that night. Remember saving you, but perhaps... He smiled slightly. Perhaps it's better this way. We get to start fresh without the weight of past mistakes. But the scars... She reached up, her fingers hovering over his shoulder, where he knew the knife wound had left its mark. You carry the evidence of what happened even if you don't remember. Then they're scars worth having. Adrian caught her hand, holding it against his chest where his heart was hammering. Eleanor, these past weeks I've been getting to know you. Not the girl you were 5 years ago, but the woman you are now. Strong, intelligent, brave enough to face an arranged marriage with dignity and grace. That's who I'm marrying. Not some memory I can't even recall. You're being too kind, she whispered, but she didn't pull her hand away. I'm being honest. He squeezed her fingers gently. Though I have to ask, is this why you agreed to the marriage? Because you felt you owed me? Eleanor's expression turned fierce. No. I agreed because my father asked, because I had no choice if I wanted to preserve his legacy. But knowing it was you, she took a shaking breath. Knowing it was you made it bearable, made it feel less like a trap and more like maybe fate was giving me a second chance. A chance to know the man who saved me. To perhaps, someday, be worthy of that sacrifice. "You're already worthy," Adrian said. "You always were." They stood there, hands clasped, faces inches apart, and Adrian felt something fundamental shift between them. This was no longer just a marriage of convenience, no longer simply duty and necessity. There was history between them now, even if he couldn't remember it. There was a connection that went deeper than contracts and wills. A soft knock at the door made them spring apart. Hunt Millicent's voice came through the crack. "Forgive the interruption, but you've been alone for nearly half an hour. For the sake of propriety, I must insist on joining you." Eleanor flushed, wiping at her tear-stained cheeks. "Of course. Please, come in." Millicent entered, her sharp eyes taking in Eleanor's tears and Adrian's protective stance. "I see the conversation was illuminating." "You knew," Adrian said. "It wasn't a question. Your valet told me about the attack years ago, and when James contacted me about chaperoning Miss Whitmore, he may have mentioned certain circumstances." Millicent settled into a chair. "I thought it best if you two found your way to the truth together." Adrian wanted to be angry at the manipulation, but he couldn't muster it. Instead, he turned back to Eleanor. "No more secrets between us, agreed?" She nodded. "Agreed. Then we'll face whatever comes next together." He took her hand again, this time in full view of his aunt. "The wedding is in 2 weeks, and when you become my Duchess, it will be with full knowledge of who we are to each other." 2 weeks, Eleanor repeated, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. "That's not much time." "No," Adrian agreed. "But perhaps we don't need time to build something from nothing. Perhaps we just need to remember what was already there." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. The engagement that had seemed like a business arrangement took on new depth, new meaning. Adrian found himself actually looking forward to his daily calls, to the conversations that grew easier and more natural with each passing day. Eleanor told him about her years in Bath, about the education her father had insisted upon despite society's disapproval. She spoke of her love for philosophy and mathematics, her secret wish to attend university lectures like the gentleman did. She confessed her fear of childbirth, her worry that she wouldn't be a good mother because she'd lost her own so young. Adrian shared his own fears, the crushing weight of responsibility, the guilt of not being enough to save Ravenswood on his own, the loneliness of being a duke with a crumbling estate and no one to share the burden. He told her about his sister Catherine, about watching her marry a country squire because he couldn't afford to give her a proper season, about the tenants who looked to him for salvation he couldn't provide. They attended more social events, and this time when society watched them, they saw something different. Not just a duke and an heiress, but 2 people who genuinely seemed to enjoy each other's company, who finished each other's sentences and shared private smiles, who stood a little too close, whose hands lingered a little too long when they danced. Marcus Fairfax appeared at one such event, and Eleanor didn't flee. Instead, she faced him with Adrian at her side, her head held high. "Lord Fairfax," she said coolly. "Miss Whitmore, or should I say the future Duchess of Ravenswood." Fairfax's smile was sharp. "Congratulations on your engagement, though I must say I'm surprised your father chose Ravenswood over someone with a more substantial fortune." "My father chose a man of honor," Eleanor said. "Something you know nothing about." Fairfax's expression darkened. "Careful, Eleanor. You wouldn't want certain stories from your past to reach your husband's ears." Adrian stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and Fairfax. "Miss Whitmore's past is her own business, as is her future, which doesn't include entertaining conversation with men who attempted to ruin her reputation." "Attempted?" Fairfax's eyebrows rose. "Is that what she told you?" "That's what happened." Adrian's voice was ice. "And if I ever hear you speak of it again, if I ever see you approach my wife with anything less than the respect she deserves, I will ruin you. Not financially, that seems to be happening on its own, but socially. I'll make certain every door in London closes to you. Do I make myself clear?" Fairfax's face flushed with anger, but he must have seen something in Adrian's eyes that convinced him not to push. He bowed stiffly and walked away. Eleanor's hand found Adrian's, squeezing tightly. Thank you. You don't need to thank me for protecting what's mine, Adrian said, then paused. Or rather, what will be mine in 2 weeks. What's yours? Eleanor corrected softly. I've been yours since the night you saved me, Adrian. I just didn't know it yet. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. They weren't speaking of legal ownership or contractual obligations. They were speaking of something else entirely, something that was growing between them with each passing day, something that felt dangerously close to love. But even as Adrian allowed himself to hope, even as he let himself imagine a future where this marriage might become more than duty, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. Eleanor had told him about 5 years ago, about Fairfax and the attack. But there had been something in Pemberton's voice when he mentioned the heir requirement, something in the way Eleanor had paled when discussing children. What else was she keeping from him? What other secrets lurked beneath the surface? And when they finally came to light, because secrets always did, would they destroy the fragile connection they'd built, or make it stronger? Only time would tell. And time, Adrian was beginning to realize, was the one luxury they didn't have. The wedding was in 2 weeks, and after that the real test would begin. The morning of the wedding dawned grey and cold, with rain pattering against the windows of Eleanor's bedroom in the Whitmore townhouse. She stood before the mirror while her lady's maid fastened the last buttons on her wedding gown, white silk with delicate lace overlay, elegant but not ostentatious. Mourning conventions dictated a quiet ceremony, but even so, Eleanor felt the weight of the occasion pressing down on her shoulders. In 2 hours, she would become the Duchess of Ravenswood. She would bind herself legally, socially, and, eventually, physically to Adrian Blackwell. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt an unexpected flutter of anticipation. These past 2 weeks had changed everything. Adrian wasn't the cold, duty-bound aristocrat she'd feared. He was thoughtful, occasionally awkward, surprisingly funny when he let his guard down. He listened when she spoke about philosophy or politics, never condescending, never dismissive. He'd begun to feel like someone she could genuinely care for, like someone she was already beginning to love. The thought made her breath catch. Love, such a dangerous word for an arranged marriage. But wasn't it the truth? Hadn't she been half in love with him since that night 5 years ago, when he'd fought 4 men to protect a stranger? And now, getting to know the man behind the heroic gesture, she was falling the rest of the way. "You look beautiful, miss," her maid said softly. "His Grace is a lucky man." Eleanor smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes, because there was still one secret she hadn't told Adrian, one truth that burned in her chest every time he spoke of the future, of children, of the heir they needed to produce. She'd tried to tell him a dozen times over the past 2 weeks, tried to find the words to explain what even her physician barely understood. But every time she opened her mouth, fear closed her throat, fear that he would look at her differently, fear that the tentative affection growing between them would wither when he learned the truth. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Whitmore, the carriage is ready." It was time. The ceremony took place at St. George's, Hanover Square, with only a handful of witnesses present: Aunt Millicent, Adrian's sister Catherine, the solicitor Pemberton, and a few close family friends. The church was dim, candlelight flickering against ancient stone, and when Eleanor walked down the aisle on Pemberton's arm, her father's last gift, having asked the solicitor to give her away, she saw Adrian waiting at the altar. He wore black formal attire, his dark hair brushed back, and when he turned to watch her approach, the expression on his face made her stumble slightly. Wonder. That's what she saw there. Not duty or resignation, but genuine wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Their vows were traditional, spoken in voices that only trembled slightly. When Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, a family heirloom, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his mother, Eleanor felt the weight of it like a brand. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar intoned. "You may kiss the bride." Adrian's hands cupped her face with infinite gentleness, and when his lips touched hers, it was soft, careful, a question rather than a claim. Eleanor's eyes fluttered closed, and for just a moment she let herself believe that this marriage might actually become everything she'd secretly dreamed of. When they pulled apart, Adrian's eyes searched hers. "Hello, wife," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Hello, husband," she whispered back, and the smile that broke across his face was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty that had led them here. The wedding breakfast was held at Ravenswood House, Adrian's London townhouse, which would now be her home. It was smaller than her father's residence, more worn, but Eleanor could see the bones of grandeur beneath the faded wallpaper and threadbare carpets. With proper investment, it could be beautiful again. "What do you think?" Adrian asked, as they stood together in the entrance hall after the guests had departed. "It's not much, I know. The country estate is in even worse condition, but—" "It's perfect," Eleanor interrupted. "It's home." Something in Adrian's expression softened. "Our home. We'll restore it together." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and Eleanor's heart squeezed. This was real. They were married, and despite the circumstances, despite the contracts and clauses and obligations, she was happy. "I have something for you," Adrian said, leading her to the library. "A wedding gift." On the desk sat a leather-bound ledger and several folders of documents. Eleanor looked at him questioningly. "Complete transparency," he said. "Every debt, every obligation, every creditor. You said you wanted to know exactly what we're facing. This is everything." Eleanor opened the ledger, scanning the columns of numbers. The debts were staggering, worse than she'd imagined. Mortgages, loans, outstanding bills to tradesmen, back wages owed to servants. If not for her fortune, Ravenswood would have been lost within months. "I won't hide the truth from you," Adrian said quietly. "Not about this, not about anything. We promised no more secrets, remember?" The words hit her like a physical blow. No more secrets. But she was still keeping one, wasn't she? The biggest secret of all. "Adrian," she began, her throat tight. "There's something I need to tell you. Something about—" A knock at the door interrupted her. Morrison, the butler, entered with an apologetic expression. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Mr. Pemberton is here. He says it's urgent." Eleanor's stomach sank. Pemberton wouldn't come on their wedding day unless something was seriously wrong. The solicitor entered, his face grave. "Your Grace, Your Grace, forgive me, but this couldn't wait. I've just received word from Dr. Harrison. He needs to see the Duchess immediately." "Dr. Harrison?" Adrian frowned. "Eleanor's physician?" Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "No, not now. Not today. What's this about?" Adrian's hand tightened on hers. Pemberton looked uncomfortable. Perhaps the Duchess should speak with Dr. Harrison privately before— No. Eleanor's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Whatever Dr. Harrison has to say, my husband should hear it." 20 minutes later, they sat in the drawing room as Dr. Harrison, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner, delivered news that shattered the fragile happiness of the morning. "I'm sorry to intrude on your wedding day," Harrison began, "but I felt you needed to know immediately. The Duchess came to see me 3 weeks ago, concerned about certain irregularities. I conducted examinations and consulted with specialists in Edinburgh." "What kind of irregularities?" Adrian's voice was tight. Harrison's gaze settled on Eleanor with pity. "Your Grace, I'm afraid the scarring from the fever you suffered 2 years ago has caused significant damage to your reproductive system. The likelihood of you conceiving a child is extremely low. Nearly impossible, in fact." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, the ripples spreading outward in devastating waves. Adrian went very still. "Impossible." "I wouldn't say impossible entirely," Harrison said carefully. "Medical science has been known to be wrong. Miracles do happen. But in my professional opinion, based on the extent of the damage, I would not advise you to hope for natural conception." Eleanor couldn't breathe. She'd known, of course, had suspected for months, had confirmed her fears with Harrison 3 weeks before the wedding, but hearing it spoken aloud, seeing Adrian's face drain of color, made it horrifyingly real. "Why wasn't I told about this before?" Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. "The Duchess only consulted me recently. I'm asking my wife." Adrian turned to Eleanor, and the look in his eyes made her want to weep. "You knew? Before the wedding, you knew?" "Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "For how long?" 3 weeks. Dr. Harrison confirmed it 3 weeks ago. Adrian stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. 3 weeks. We've been married for 3 hours, and you've known for 3 weeks that you likely can't give me the heir we need to secure your fortune. Adrian, please. Did you think I wouldn't notice? He spun to face her, and she'd never seen him angry before. The cold fury in his expression was worse than if he'd shouted. Did you think we could just pretend? Hope for a miracle? The will stipulates an heir within 2 years, Eleanor. Without one, everything. Your father's fortune, Ravenswood's salvation, all of it, goes to the Hartley cousins. I know. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know, and I'm sorry. I tried to tell you. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? That I wouldn't marry you. Adrian's laugh was bitter. You were right. If I'd known, if I'd understood that this marriage was built on a foundation that can never be fulfilled, I would have... He stopped, pressing his hands to his face. Dr. Harrison stood quietly. I'll leave you both to discuss this privately. Your Grace, if you have questions, I'm available at any time. After the physician left, the silence in the room was suffocating. Eleanor stood, moving toward Adrian, but he stepped back. Don't. Please let me explain. Explain what? His eyes were bleak. Explain how you kept this from me, how you let me believe we had a chance, how you married me knowing full well that in 2 years we'll lose everything. I married you because I had no choice, the words burst from her. The will gave me 3 months to marry you specifically, or lose the fortune immediately. At least this way we have 2 years. 2 years to try, to hope for that miracle Dr. Harrison mentioned. 2 years to find another solution. What solution? Adrian's voice rose. The will is ironclad. Heir or nothing. Those were your father's terms. Then we'll challenge the will. We'll... On what grounds? That your father was of sound mind when he wrote it. He was. That the terms are legal. They are. Adrian turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid. You've trapped us both, Eleanor. You've trapped us in a marriage that's doomed to fail. The accusation cut deeper than any blade. I never meant to trap you. I was trying to protect what my father built. I was trying to honor his wishes while also giving us a chance. A chance at what? Adrian whirled to face her. You knew from the beginning this was about securing the succession, about producing an heir. And you knew you couldn't do it, but you married me anyway because I love you. The confession tore from her throat, raw and desperate. I've loved you since that night 5 years ago. And these past weeks, getting to know you, I fell even deeper. I married you because even if we only have 2 years, even if we lose everything in the end, I wanted those 2 years with you. I wanted to be your wife, Adrian. Not just in name, but truly. Adrian stared at her, and she saw the war raging in his eyes, anger and hurt and something else, something that might have been answering love if circumstances were different. Love, he said finally, and his voice was empty. You speak of love. But love requires trust, Eleanor. It requires honesty. And you've given me neither. That's not fair, isn't it? You kept this from me for 3 weeks. 3 weeks where we could have been planning, strategizing, finding alternatives. Instead, you let me believe we had a future. Let me start to hope that this marriage might become something real. It is real. Eleanor moved toward him, desperate to make him understand. My feelings for you are real. The connection between us is real. The fact that my body may not cooperate doesn't change. It changes everything. Adrian's control finally cracked, his voice rising. Don't you understand? Without an heir, we lose Ravenswood. Without Ravenswood, I failed 6 generations of my family. I failed my tenants, my sister, everyone who depends on me. And I've done it by marrying a woman who knew from the start it was all for nothing. The words hung in the air, brutal and final. Eleanor felt something break inside her chest. I see, she said quietly. So I'm not a wife to you. I'm just a means to an end, a womb to produce your heir. And since I've failed at that, I'm worthless. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Her voice shook with fury and heartbreak. You speak of trust and honesty, but what about you, Adrian? You married me for my money. You stood in that church today and made vows, and the entire time you were thinking about Ravenswood, about what I could give you, not about me. never about me. That's not true, isn't it? She wiped angrily at her tears. Tell me honestly, if I'd told you 3 weeks ago about the medical diagnosis, would you have married me anyway? Without the hope of an heir, would you have still gone through with this wedding? The hesitation in his eyes was answer enough. Eleanor laughed, but it came out as a sob. I thought so. At least I'm honest about my motivations. I love you, Adrian. I've loved you desperately and completely, and I married you despite knowing it might destroy both of us. Can you say the same? I married you because I gave my word to a dying man, Adrian said. Because I needed to save my estate. Because duty demanded it. Those were my reasons, and I've never pretended otherwise. No, you haven't, Eleanor said softly, and that makes this so much worse. Because I hoped that these past weeks meant something to you, that you were beginning to care for me as more than just a solution to your problems. But I was wrong, wasn't I? Eleanor, I think I'd like to be alone now. She moved to the door, her movements stiff and mechanical. This is your house. I'll retire to my chambers. You can do whatever you need to do. Where are you going? To our wedding night chambers where I was supposed to... She couldn't finish. The thought of the wedding night they'd planned, the tentative intimacy they'd been building toward now seemed like a cruel joke. It doesn't matter. None of it matters anymore. She left him standing in the drawing room, and she managed to make it all the way to the bedroom before the tears came in earnest. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She'd ruined everything. She'd kept the secret too long, let hope blind her to reality, and now the fragile connection she and Adrian had built was shattered beyond repair. The lady's maid appeared, helping her out of the wedding gown with gentle efficiency. Eleanor barely registered the process, barely felt the silk sliding from her shoulders or the nightgown being pulled over her head. When she was finally alone, she climbed into the massive four-poster bed, the bed she was supposed to share with her husband, and stared at the canopy above her. Downstairs, she could hear Adrian's footsteps pacing back and forth in the library. Back and forth, a caged animal trying to find a way out of a trap. And she had built that trap. She had lured him in with silence and secrets, and hope that was never real to begin with. Eleanor pressed her hands to her stomach, to the body that had betrayed both of them. 2 years. That's all they had. 2 years to produce a miracle that even the best physicians in England said was impossible. 2 years before they lost everything, the fortune, the estate, and whatever chance at happiness they might have had. She'd told Adrian she loved him, had laid her heart bare in a desperate attempt to make him understand. But his silence had been answer enough. He might have been beginning to care for her, might have even been on the verge of falling in love, but not anymore. Now when he looked at her, he would see only failure, only the broken promise of an heir that would never come. The wedding night stretched before her, long and lonely, and filled with the sound of her husband's pacing footsteps that never came up the stairs. And Eleanor understood with devastating clarity that this was only the beginning. The real tragedy wasn't the medical diagnosis or the impossible terms of the will. The real tragedy was that they'd found each other, had begun to build something real and precious, only to watch it crumble under the weight of secrets and circumstances neither of them could control. She'd married the man she loved on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Instead, it felt like the first day of a 2-year countdown to losing everything that mattered, including, perhaps most painfully, the heart of the man sleeping alone in the library while she lay abandoned in their marriage bed. 3 months passed in a cold stalemate that was more painful than open warfare would have been. Adrian and Eleanor maintained the appearance of a proper marriage for society's sake. They attended balls and dinner parties together, presenting a united front to the ton's watchful eyes. They discussed household matters with polite efficiency. They shared meals in strained silence, making conversation about the weather or estate business, never straying into anything personal. But at night, Adrian retired to his separate chambers on the opposite end of the corridor. He'd made no attempt to claim his husbandly rights, and Eleanor was too proud and too heartbroken to ask why. She knew why. What was the point of physical intimacy when conception was nearly impossible? Why pretend at marriage when the foundation had crumbled? The servants whispered, of course. The Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood, newly married and already living like strangers. But Adrian's glare silenced any open speculation, and Eleanor's rigid dignity discouraged questions. During the day, Adrian buried himself in estate management. Eleanor's fortune had indeed saved Ravenswood. Debts were being paid, repairs had begun, the tenants were receiving proper support for the first time in years. He threw himself into the work with almost manic intensity, as if he could rebuild the estate even if he couldn't rebuild their marriage. Eleanor, for her part, retreated into her books. She spent hours in the library, reading philosophy and poetry, trying to find solace in words when her husband refused to offer any. She consulted with physicians privately, desperately seeking a second opinion, a different diagnosis, any shred of hope. But they all said the same thing. Conception was unlikely, nearly impossible, nearly. That single word kept her awake at night. Nearly impossible wasn't completely impossible, but how did she bridge the chasm between them long enough to even try? Aunt Millicent watched it all with barely concealed frustration. "This is ridiculous," she announced one afternoon, cornering Eleanor in the drawing room. "You're both miserable, you're both in love with each other, and you're both too stubborn to admit it." "He doesn't love me," Eleanor said quietly, not looking up from her embroidery. "He married me for duty. I simply failed to fulfill my part of the bargain." "Nonsense. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Like you're water and he's dying of thirst, but he's too proud to take a drink." "Then let him die of thirst," Eleanor said, but her voice cracked. "I told him I loved him, Aunt Millicent. I laid myself completely bare and he said nothing. He can't even stand to be in the same room with me for more than necessary." "Have you tried talking to him? Really talking? About what? The fact that I'm broken, that I've ruined both our lives?" Eleanor's hands trembled and she set down her needlework before she stabbed herself. "Every conversation leads back to the same place. The air we can't produce, the fortune we're going to lose, the future that's slipping away day by day." Millicent sighed. "You're both fools." "But I suppose fools in love often are." That evening, Eleanor was reading in the library when Adrian entered unexpectedly. He stopped short when he saw her, as if he'd forgotten she sometimes occupied this space. "I apologize," he said stiffly. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll come back later." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "This is your library, your house. I'm the one who should leave." "Eleanor." "Your Grace," she corrected, standing. "I think we should maintain proper formality, don't you? Since we're to be business partners rather than husband and wife." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. None of this is fair." 3 months of silence exploded out of her. "None of this is what either of us wanted, but at least I'm honest about my feelings. At least I'm not hiding behind duty and disappointment." "Hiding?" Adrian's eyes flashed. "You want to know what I'm hiding?" "I'm hiding the fact that I lie awake every night knowing my wife is down the hall, knowing she's suffering, and being unable to do a damn thing about it because I'm so angry and hurt and confused that I don't trust myself to go near her." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and shocking. "You're angry at me," Eleanor said. "I understand that. I kept something from you, something crucial. And you have every right. I'm not angry at you." Adrian ran his hands through his hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I'm angry at your father for putting those impossible conditions in the will. I'm angry at fate for damaging your body. I'm angry at myself for caring more about losing you than losing the fortune, and I don't know what to do with that feeling." Eleanor's breath caught. "What did you say?" Adrian turned away, his shoulders rigid. "You heard me. Say it again. Please." "Why? So you can throw it back in my face? Remind me that I married you for money and now I'm trapped in a marriage that's destroying both of us? Is that what you think?" Eleanor moved toward him, her heart hammering. "That I would weaponize your feelings. I don't know what to think anymore." Adrian's voice was hoarse. "All I know is that somewhere in the past 3 months my priorities shifted. I used to lie awake worrying about Ravenswood, about the debts, about my failure. Now I lie awake thinking about you, about the pain in your eyes when you think no one's watching, about how I've made everything worse by pushing you away when I should have been pulling you closer." "Then why didn't you?" Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. "Why have you spent 3 months avoiding me like I'm contagious? Because I didn't know how to face you without falling apart." Adrian turned, and she saw tears in his own eyes. "You told me you loved me on our wedding day, and I couldn't say it back. Not in that moment, not when I'd just learned you'd kept such a devastating secret. But Eleanor, these past 3 months have been torture. Watching you from a distance. Maintaining this cold civility when all I want is to hold you and tell you that I don't care about the heir. I don't care about the fortune. I just want you." Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. You want me? Of course I want you." Adrian closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face. "I've wanted you since that first day in your father's sick room, when you looked at me with such fire in your eyes. I've wanted you more every day since. And when I found out about the diagnosis, I wasn't angry because you'd ruined my plans. I was angry because you're hurting and I can't fix it. Because time is running out, and I'm terrified of losing you. Losing me." Eleanor's hands came up to grip his wrists. "Adrian, I'm right here. I've been here the whole time, but for how long?" His voice broke. "In less than 2 years, when we haven't produced an heir, what happens? The fortune reverts to the Hartleys. Do you stay with me in poverty? Do we maintain this sham of a marriage when the reason for it is gone? Or do you leave, find someone else, someone who can give you the children you deserve? Children I deserve?" Eleanor laughed through her tears. "Adrian, I can't have children. That's the whole problem. Dr. Harrison said nearly impossible. Not completely impossible. Nearly impossible is just a kinder way of saying no." Eleanor pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I've consulted 4 other physicians. They all say the same thing. The scarring is too extensive. Conception is... It's not going to happen." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "All right." "All right?" Eleanor stared at him. "That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? That I'm devastated? I am. That I'm terrified of losing everything? I am that too. But Eleanor, the thing that terrifies me most isn't losing Ravenswood or your fortune. It's losing you. You haven't had me for 3 months, then let me have you now." Adrian reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Let me try to fix what I broke. Let me be your husband, truly your husband, for whatever time we have left." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to fall into his arms and pretend everything would be all right. But the practical part of her, the part that had learned hard lessons about hope and heartbreak, held back. "And when the 2 years are up," she asked quietly, "when we lose everything, what then?" "I don't know," Adrian admitted, "but I'd rather face that future with you by my side than spend another day in this cold war we've created." Before Eleanor could respond, Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face unusually grave. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but Mr. Pemberton has arrived. He says it's urgent and concerns the will." Eleanor and Adrian exchanged glances. "Show him in," Adrian said. Pemberton entered, and one look at his face told Eleanor this was bad news. The solicitor carried a leather case, and his hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "I'm sorry to intrude at this hour," Pemberton began, "but I've just returned from a meeting with the Hartley cousins and their solicitor. They've filed a challenge to the will." Adrian went very still. "On what grounds? They're claiming that Mr. Whitmore was not of sound mind when he wrote the heir provision. They argue that the 2-year timeline is unreasonably short and that the requirement itself is unusual enough to suggest mental incompetence." "That's ridiculous," Eleanor said. "My father was perfectly sound when he wrote that will. You were there, Mr. Pemberton. You witnessed it, I know, Your Grace. And I've submitted my testimony to that effect, but the Hartleys have found physicians willing to testify that Mr. Whitmore's illness may have affected his judgment in the months before his death." Pemberton pulled out a document. "There's more. They've also uncovered another clause, one that Mr. Whitmore had me include, but instructed me not to reveal unless certain conditions were met." Adrian's hand tightened on Eleanor's. "What clause?" Pemberton looked profoundly uncomfortable. "If the Duchess fails to conceive within the first year of marriage, or if medical evidence suggests conception is unlikely, a provision can be made for alternative arrangements." "Alternative arrangements?" Eleanor felt sick. "What does that mean?" "It means," Pemberton said quietly, "that if you cannot produce an heir through natural means, the Duke may seek to produce an heir through other means, with your documented consent." A child born of such an arrangement, if legally acknowledged, would satisfy the terms of the will. The silence in the room was absolute. "He's suggesting I take a mistress," Adrian said flatly. "Produce a bastard and legitimize it. I'm not suggesting anything, Your Grace. I'm merely informing you of the provisions your father-in-law included." Pemberton's face was miserable. He wanted to ensure every possible avenue remained open. Eleanor felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Her father had planned for this, had anticipated her failure so thoroughly that he'd created an escape clause, one that required her to consent to her husband's infidelity. No. The word came out strong, certain. "Absolutely not." "Eleanor," Adrian began. "I said no." She turned to face him. "I won't consent to that. I won't watch you father children on another woman while I sit by, barren and useless. If we're going to lose the fortune, we'll lose it with our dignity intact. The Hartleys are arguing that this clause proves Mr. Whitmore knew his daughter might not be able to conceive," Pemberton continued. "They're using it as evidence that the entire heir requirement was designed to eventually revert the fortune to them, making the will a form of fraud." "That's absurd," Eleanor protested. "My father wanted to protect me, wanted to ensure his bloodline continued. Even if you couldn't carry it yourself," Pemberton finished gently. "I'm sorry, Your Grace, but the provision is there in black and white, and the Hartleys' challenge has merit. The case will go before the Court of Chancery within the month." Adrian moved to the window, his back rigid. Eleanor could see the tension in every line of his body, could practically hear his mind racing through options, calculations, possibilities. "Is there anything else?" she asked Pemberton, her voice hollow. "Just one thing." The solicitor produced another document. "This arrived for you today, Your Grace, from Dr. Harrison." Eleanor broke the seal with trembling fingers and read quickly. Then she read again, certain she'd misunderstood. But no, the words remained the same. "What is it?" Adrian asked. Eleanor looked up, and she knew her face must have been white as paper. "Dr. Harrison wants to see us both tomorrow. He says there's been a development. New information about my condition. What kind of development? He doesn't say. Just that we should come immediately." Eleanor folded the letter with shaking hands. "What if he's found something? What if there's actually hope?" "Don't." Adrian's voice was sharp. "Don't let yourself hope, Eleanor. Hope is what's destroying us." The words cut deep, but before she could respond, Pemberton was gathering his documents. "I'll leave you both to discuss this, but Your Graces, you need to make some decisions quickly. The Hartley challenge could tie up the fortune for years, and if they succeed in proving Mr. Whitmore was incompetent, the entire will could be invalidated." After Pemberton left, Eleanor and Adrian stood in the library, the weight of the evening's revelations pressing down on them. "Alternative arrangements?" Eleanor said bitterly. "My father planned for me to be such a failure that he built in provisions for you to father children elsewhere. I would never. But you could. You could take a mistress, produce an heir, save everything. All it requires is my consent and your willingness to betray our marriage vows." "Our marriage vows," Adrian repeated. "The ones we've been ignoring for 3 months?" Eleanor flinched. "That's different." "Is it?" "We've been living like strangers, Eleanor. What's the difference between that and what your father suggested?" "The difference is love." The word burst from her. "I love you, Adrian. Even when you push me away, even when you can't say it back, I love you. And I can't watch you with another woman, no matter what my father's will demands." Adrian turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes matched her own. "Then what do we do? How do we fix this?" "I don't know if we can." Eleanor's voice broke. "Maybe we're broken beyond repair. Maybe 3 months of silence has killed whatever we were building. I don't believe that. Then prove it." Eleanor stepped closer, desperate, reckless. "Stop hiding in your chambers. Stop treating me like a mistake you regret. Be my husband, Adrian. Really be my husband for whatever time we have left. And when the 2 years are up, when we lose everything, then at least we'll have had 2 years of something real instead of 2 years of this cold, miserable pretense." Adrian stared at her, and she could see him warring with himself. Duty versus desire. Fear versus hope. The future versus the present. Finally, he closed the distance between them. His hands cupped her face, and when he kissed her, it wasn't careful or questioning. It was desperate, hungry, full of 3 months of longing and frustration, and words left unsaid. Eleanor kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his coat, pulling him closer. This was what she'd wanted since their wedding night. This heat, this passion, this feeling of being consumed by someone who wanted her as much as she wanted them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you for weeks, maybe months. I was just too much of a coward to admit it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Say it again. I love you, Eleanor Blackwell. I love your intelligence and your fire and your stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seems hopeless. I love you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for wasting 3 months when we have so little time." "Then don't waste another moment." Eleanor took his hand, placing it over her heart. "We'll see Dr. Harrison tomorrow. We'll hear whatever he has to say, and whether it's good news or bad, we'll face it together, as husband and wife, as partners, as lovers," Adrian added, and the heat in his eyes made her breath catch. "Yes," she whispered, "as lovers." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. And when he lifted her into his arms, carrying her toward the stairs, toward the bedroom they should have shared 3 months ago, Eleanor let herself hope. It might be false hope, might be the cruelest kind of optimism, given everything they faced. But for tonight, in Adrian's arms, with his love finally spoken aloud, Eleanor let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Tomorrow would bring Dr. Harrison's revelation. Next month would bring the Hartley challenge. In less than 2 years, they would face the consequences of an heir that might never come. But tonight, they had each other. And perhaps, Eleanor thought as Adrian laid her gently on their marriage bed, perhaps that would have to be enough, even if the ending was already written. Even if they were racing toward a tragedy they couldn't prevent, at least they would face it together. At least they would have loved. Dr. Harrison's office was located in a quiet corner of Harley Street, far enough from the fashionable quarters to maintain discretion, but respectable enough to serve the aristocracy. Eleanor and Adrian arrived together in the morning, their hands clasped tightly, presenting a united front that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. The previous night had changed everything. After months of cold distance, they had finally come together, not just physically, though that union had been tender and desperate and healing in ways Eleanor hadn't anticipated, but emotionally too. They had talked until dawn, sharing fears and hopes and all the things they should have said months ago. Adrian had told her about the nightmares that plagued him, dreams of watching Ravenswood crumble while his tenants looked at him with accusing eyes. Eleanor had confessed her terror of being touched, of intimacy, because every physician's examination had felt like confirmation of her brokenness. "You're not broken," Adrian had whispered against her skin. "You're perfect. And whatever Dr. Harrison says today, that won't change." Now sitting in the physician's waiting room, Eleanor clung to those words like a lifeline. Dr. Harrison appeared, his expression unreadable. "Your Graces, please come in." They followed him into his consultation room, settling into the chairs across from his desk. The physician took his time arranging papers, and Eleanor's heart hammered with each passing second. "I asked you here," Harrison finally began, "because I've been consulting with a colleague in Edinburgh, Dr. James Simpson, one of the foremost experts in female reproductive health. I sent him detailed notes about your case, Your Grace, and he suggested several possibilities I hadn't fully considered." Eleanor leaned forward. "What kind of possibilities?" "The scarring from your fever is extensive, yes, but Dr. Simpson believes it may not be as insurmountable as I initially feared. There are new techniques, new treatments, experimental, I must emphasize, that have shown some promise in similar cases." Hope flared in Eleanor's chest, dangerous and bright. "You mean I might be able to conceive?" "I mean," Harrison said carefully, "that the chances are better than I initially calculated. Perhaps as high as 20 or 30%, with proper treatment and considerable luck." 20%, Adrian repeated. His hand tightened on Eleanor's. "That's not impossible." "It's also not guaranteed," Harrison cautioned, and the treatments themselves are uncomfortable, sometimes painful. There's no certainty they would work, and pursuing them could be emotionally devastating if they fail. Eleanor's mind raced. 20 or 30%. Not the impossible odds she'd been living with, but still daunting. Still unlikely. But it was something, a chance, however small. What would the treatment involve, she asked. Harrison explained. Medical procedures she barely understood, involving instruments and examinations and regular monitoring. It sounded invasive and humiliating and desperately hopeful all at once. How long would it take, Adrian asked, to know if it worked? 6 months of treatment, then several months to conceive if the treatment is successful. You'd need to begin immediately to have any chance of producing an heir within your 2-year timeline. Eleanor and Adrian exchanged glances. Less than 2 years remained. 6 months of treatment meant they'd have perhaps a year to conceive after that. The timeline was brutally tight. There's something else, Harrison continued. The treatment would require regular intimate relations during specific times of the month. The timing would be critical. I would need to examine you weekly, Your Grace, to determine the optimal moments. Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks. The physician was essentially telling them when to consummate their marriage, reducing what should be private and sacred to a clinical schedule. We'll do it, Adrian said immediately. Whatever it takes. Adrian, Eleanor turned to him. This is my decision. My body, I know. His eyes held hers. But I'm asking you, begging you, to try. Not for Ravenswood, not for the fortune, for us. For the chance that we might actually have a future together. Eleanor wanted to say yes, wanted to embrace this sliver of hope, despite knowing it might shatter her. But the memory of 3 months of cold silence, of Adrian's anger on their wedding day, held her back. If I do this, she said slowly, if I submit to these treatments and they fail, I need to know you won't hate me for it. I need to know that our marriage, our love, doesn't depend on whether my body cooperates. Adrian pulled her into his arms, heedless of the physician watching. I love you, Eleanor. Heir or no heir, fortune or no fortune. Whatever happens, we face it together. She believed him. Finally, completely, she believed him. Then yes, she told Dr. Harrison, I'll do the treatment. The next 6 months became a blur of medical appointments, uncomfortable procedures, and carefully timed intimacy that stripped away privacy, but somehow brought them closer together. Adrian accompanied Eleanor to every appointment, holding her hand through the painful examinations, distracting her with stories and terrible jokes. They fell into a routine. Eleanor would return from Dr. Harrison's office, exhausted and sore, and Adrian would draw her a bath, sit beside the tub reading poetry aloud while she soaked. They took long walks through the gardens of Ravenswood, the country estate slowly being restored to its former glory, and talked about everything except the one question that haunted them both. Was it working? Meanwhile, the Hartley cousins' legal challenge ground through the Court of Chancery with agonizing slowness. Pemberton sent regular updates, depositions, testimonies, arguments about James Whitmore's state of mind. The cousins had produced 2 physicians willing to swear that the fever that eventually killed James had affected his mental faculties months before his death. They're lying, Eleanor said furiously, reading the latest deposition. My father was perfectly lucid until the final week. It doesn't matter if they're lying, Adrian said quietly. It matters whether the court believes them. As the months passed, Eleanor tried desperately not to hope, but hope crept in anyway, in the tenderness of Adrian's touch, in the way he looked at her each morning as if she were precious beyond measure. In the future, they were tentatively building together. Then, in the 6th month of treatment, Dr. Harrison delivered news that made Eleanor's knees buckle. I believe you may be with child, Your Grace. The words hung in the air, impossible and terrifying. You believe? Adrian's voice was tight. You're not certain. It's too early to be certain, but the signs are promising. We'll know more definitively in another few weeks. Eleanor pressed her hands to her stomach, hardly daring to breathe. A child. Their child. The heir that would save everything. Don't, Adrian said softly, reading her expression. Don't let yourself hope too much. Not yet. But how could she not hope? This was everything they'd been fighting for, everything her father had demanded, the answer to all their problems. For 3 weeks, Eleanor existed in a state of terrified anticipation. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, couldn't think about anything except the possibility growing inside her. Adrian watched her with worried eyes, trying to keep her grounded, but she could see his own desperate hope reflected in his face. Then one morning she woke to cramping pain and blood. Dr. Harrison confirmed what she already knew. There had been no pregnancy. Just her body playing a cruel trick, offering false hope before snatching it away. Eleanor didn't cry. She'd moved beyond tears into a numb emptiness that frightened Adrian more than grief would have. "We'll try again," he said, holding her while she stared at nothing. "Dr. Harrison said it can take several attempts. We still have time." But even as he spoke, they both knew the truth. They had 8 months left. 8 months to conceive, carry to term. Impossible. Even if she conceived tomorrow, the child wouldn't be born before the 2-year deadline. They had failed. Pemberton confirmed it 3 weeks later, arriving at Ravenswood with documents and a face full of pity. "The Court of Chancery has ruled in favor of the Hartleys," he said. "They've determined that while Mr. Whitmore was likely of sound mind, the heir provision was so unusual and restrictive that it constitutes an unreasonable restraint. Combined with your inability to conceive, Your Grace, they've decided to modify the will's terms." "Modify how?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew, already felt the future crumbling around her. "The fortune will pass to the Hartley cousins in 3 months' time. You'll retain a widow's portion as originally stipulated, 1/3 of the estate, approximately £100,000. The rest—" "I'm sorry, Your Graces. I fought as hard as I could." After Pemberton left, Adrian and Eleanor sat in the library, the same library where they'd first begun to know each other, where they'd shared their first real conversation, where everything had started to go wrong and then, eventually, started to go right. £100,000, Adrian said. "It's not nothing. We could maintain Ravenswood, keep the estate running, provide for the tenants. It wouldn't be as comfortable, but we'd survive." "Would we?" Eleanor looked at him. "Could you really live with me knowing I'm the reason you lost everything? Knowing that if you'd married someone else, someone whole, you'd have had the heir, the fortune, everything your family needed?" "Don't." Adrian's voice was sharp. "Don't do this to yourself. To us. I'm being realistic." Eleanor stood, moving to the window. Outside, the grounds of Ravenswood stretched in carefully maintained beauty. Beauty purchased with her fortune, beauty that would soon be beyond their means to sustain. "You married me to save this estate. I failed you. That's the simple truth." "The simple truth," Adrian said, coming to stand behind her, "is that I married you because a dying man asked me to protect you. I stayed married to you because I fell in love with you. And I would choose you, Eleanor, choose us, over any fortune, any estate, any future that didn't include you by my side." She turned to face him, and the love in his eyes nearly broke her. "You say that now, but what about in 5 years, 10? When Ravenswood is crumbling again because we can't afford the repairs, when your tenants are suffering because we don't have the capital to invest, will you still choose me then?" Yes. The word was absolute, unshakable. 1,000 times, yes. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she'd learned hard lessons about hope and promises. "The alternative arrangement," she said quietly, "the provision my father included. We could still—" No, Adrian's hands cupped her face. "I won't father children on another woman. I won't betray our marriage vows, even for this. But if we don't, we lose everything. The Hartleys will squander my father's legacy, all his work, all his dreams. We're built on trying to control you from the grave," Adrian finished. "Your father loved you, Eleanor, but his will, his demands, they've caused nothing but pain. I won't add to that pain by betraying you." Tears finally came, streaming down Eleanor's face. "I love you so much it terrifies me. Because loving you means watching you lose everything, and knowing I'm the cause. You're not the cause. Fate is, circumstances, your father's impossible demands are." Adrian pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest. "But you, Eleanor, you're the only good thing to come from this entire disaster. You're the only thing that matters." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the sun set beyond the windows and shadows lengthened across the library floor. That night, they made love with a desperate intensity born of knowing their time was running out. Not the clinical, scheduled intimacy of the treatment period, but something raw and real and goodbye flavored. "I wish we had more time," Eleanor whispered against his skin afterward. "We have the rest of our lives," Adrian said, "just not in the way we planned." The next 3 months passed too quickly. Eleanor and Adrian made the most of their remaining time with the full fortune, ensuring the tenants were provided for, making critical repairs to the estate, securing what future they could. On the day the money transferred to the Hartleys, Adrian and Eleanor stood in the library one final time, as the wealthiest Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood would ever be. "We should attend the transfer," Pemberton had suggested, "sign the final documents in person," but Adrian had refused. "I won't watch them gloat. We'll sign whatever needs signing here at Ravenswood, where we can remember what we're fighting to preserve." The documents arrived by courier. Eleanor signed her name, Eleanor Blackwell, Duchess of Ravenswood, and watched 2/3 of her father's fortune pass to men who would waste it within years. Adrian signed beside her, his hand steady despite the weight of what they were losing. "It's done," Pemberton said quietly when he collected the documents. "I'm sorry, Your Graces. Truly sorry." After he left, the house seemed quieter, emptier, as if the fortune itself had been a presence, and its absence left a void. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked. Adrian took her hand. "We live, we love each other, we make the best of what we have. And when the money runs out, when we can't maintain the estate anymore, then we sell Ravenswood." The words clearly cost him, but his voice was firm. "We buy a smaller property somewhere quiet. We live simply. And we're happy, Eleanor, because we'll be together. You'd give up your family's legacy for me. I'd give up anything for you." Adrian pulled her close. "Don't you understand yet? You're not my second choice or my consolation prize. You're the only prize that matters. The only legacy I care about is the life we build together." Eleanor let herself be held, let herself believe in his words, even as part of her wondered how long love could survive the slow erosion of financial security and broken dreams. 6 months later, Eleanor missed her monthly courses. She didn't tell Adrian immediately, couldn't bear to see hope bloom in his eyes only to crush it again if she was wrong. Instead, she waited, watching for other signs. The nausea that came in waves, the exhaustion, the tenderness in her breasts. When she finally couldn't deny it anymore, she visited Dr. Harrison alone. "You're with child," he confirmed, wonder in his voice. "Against all odds, Your Grace, you're pregnant." Eleanor pressed her hands to her stomach, and for the first time in months she felt something that wasn't despair. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She raced home to tell Adrian, finding him in the gardens, overseeing repairs they could barely afford. "Adrian," she called his name, and he turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Eleanor?" "What is it?" I'm pregnant." The words burst from her. "I'm carrying our child, Adrian, our baby." His expression cycled through shock, disbelief, hope, joy. Then he was running toward her, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. "A baby," he breathed. "Eleanor, we're going to have a baby, I know." She cupped his face. "I know it's too late for the will, too late to save the fortune, but nothing," Adrian interrupted. "This isn't about money or estates or wills. This is about us, our family, our future." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise. For one perfect moment, Eleanor let herself be happy. Let herself imagine the future, their child, growing up in a modest home somewhere far from London's judging eyes. A simple life, but one filled with love. Then the cramping started. It began as a dull ache, easily dismissed. But within hours, it had intensified into pain that doubled her over. Adrian called for Dr. Harrison, his face white with terror. Harrison examined her and delivered the news with infinite gentleness. "I'm so sorry, Your Grace, you're losing the baby." The next 12 hours were a nightmare of pain and blood and loss. Adrian held her hand through all of it, his face streaked with tears as he watched their hope, their child, slip away. When it was over, When Eleanor lay exhausted and empty in their bed, Harrison spoke quietly with Adrian in the hallway, but she could hear every word through the door he'd left slightly ajar. The scarring was too extensive, Harrison said. Her body couldn't sustain the pregnancy. I'm sorry, Your Grace, but I don't believe the Duchess will ever be able to carry a child to term. The damage is simply too severe. Eleanor heard Adrian's sharp intake of breath, heard the moment his hope finally died. She turned her face into the pillow and let the tears come, not just for the baby they'd lost, but for all the futures they would never have, the children they would never raise, the legacy they could never leave. When Adrian came back into the room, his eyes were red-rimmed but dry. He climbed into bed beside her, pulling her into his arms with infinite tenderness. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Hush. This isn't your fault. We had a chance. One chance, and my body—" "Your body went through hell and tried its best," Adrian said fiercely. "You have nothing to apologize for." But Eleanor knew better. She had failed him, failed in the one thing her father's will demanded, failed in the one thing society expected of a wife, failed in the deepest, most fundamental way. The months that followed were the darkest of Eleanor's life. She withdrew into herself, barely eating, barely sleeping. The joy she'd felt during those brief weeks of pregnancy had been replaced by a grief so profound it seemed to swallow her whole. Adrian tried everything, taking her on walks, reading to her, simply sitting beside her in companionable silence. But nothing reached her. She was drowning in loss and she couldn't find the surface. "You need to let me in," Adrian pleaded one night. "Please, Eleanor, don't shut me out. Not now." "Why not?" Her voice was hollow. "I've failed you in every way that matters, failed to give you an heir, failed to preserve my father's fortune, failed to even carry a pregnancy to term." "What's left?" "Us," Adrian said desperately. "We're what's left. Our love, our marriage, our life together. That's all I need, Eleanor. That's all I've ever needed." "You say that now," she said bitterly, "but eventually you'll resent me. Eventually you'll wish you'd married someone whole, someone who could have given you everything I can't. I don't want everything. I want you." But Eleanor couldn't hear him anymore. The grief had built walls too high for his words to scale. 2 weeks later, Adrian found her packing a trunk in their bedroom. "What are you doing?" he asked, though dread made the answer obvious. "I'm leaving." Eleanor didn't look at him, kept folding clothes with mechanical precision. "I've made arrangements to stay with my father's sister in Scotland. She's agreed to take me in." "Eleanor, no, it's better this way." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "You can annul the marriage on grounds of my inability to conceive. You're still young, Adrian. You can find someone else, someone who can give you the children and the future you deserve. I don't want someone else." Adrian grabbed her hands, stopping her packing. "I want you. How many times do I have to say it before you believe me? I can't believe it." Eleanor finally looked at him and her eyes were dead. "Because loving me has cost you everything. Your fortune, your future, the family you should have had. I won't let it cost you any more. I won't watch you slowly come to hate me for all the things I can't give you. I could never hate you. You will. Eventually you will." She pulled her hands free and resumed packing. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Please don't try to stop me. Let me have this one kindness. Let me leave before I destroy you completely." Adrian stood frozen, watching the woman he loved pack away their life together. He'd faced many failures in his 34 years, financial ruin, social disgrace, the slow crumbling of his family's legacy. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for watching Eleanor walk away because she believed she wasn't enough. "I love you," he said, one final time. "That will never change. No matter where you go, no matter how much distance you put between us, I will always love you." Eleanor's hands stilled on the clothes she was folding. For a moment, Adrian thought she might relent, might turn around and fall into his arms and let him convince her they could survive this. Instead, she said quietly, "I know. That's what makes this so unbearably sad. We love each other desperately, completely, and it still isn't enough." Eleanor left the next morning before dawn, taking nothing but her clothes and the 1/3 portion of her father's fortune that remained legally hers. Adrian stood at the window and watched her carriage disappear down the drive, taking his heart with it. The house felt impossibly empty without her. Every room held memories: the library where they'd first truly talked, the drawing room where they'd planned their future, the bedroom where they'd loved each other and lost their child. Adrian threw himself into managing what remained of the estate, working until exhaustion claimed him each night. He refused offers from friends to socialize, declined invitations to London, turned away the well-meaning relatives who suggested he seek an annulment and find a more suitable wife. Because there was no one more suitable, there was only Eleanor. 6 months passed, then a year. Adrian's hair began to grey at the temples, and lines appeared around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The servants whispered about the Duke who'd loved his wife so much that her absence was killing him slowly. Then, on a cold February morning, 2 years to the day since Adrian had promised a dying man he would marry his daughter, a letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, beloved, unbearable. "Adrian, I'm dying. The physicians say I have perhaps a month, possibly less. The same fever that scarred me years ago has returned, and this time my body cannot fight it. I'm writing to tell you that leaving was the greatest mistake of my life. I thought I was setting you free, but I was only condemning us both to a different kind of prison, one built of loneliness and regret. I spent these 2 years trying to convince myself I'd made the right choice, that you would move on, find happiness with someone else, build the life you deserved. But I see now that in trying to save you from a future with me, I stole the only future either of us wanted. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to come. But I needed you to know. Every day we've been apart has been agony. Every morning I've woken without you beside me has been a reminder of what my fear cost us both. I love you, Adrian. I have loved you since the night you saved my life 5 years ago, and I will love you until my last breath. That love wasn't enough to make me stay, but perhaps, in whatever comes after this, it will be enough to earn your forgiveness. Yours always." Eleanor Adrian read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking harder with each pass. Then he was moving, shouting for Morrison to prepare the carriage, to pack his things, to send word ahead that he was coming. The journey to Scotland took 2 days of brutal travel, changing horses at every posting inn, barely stopping to eat or sleep. By the time Adrian reached the small cottage where Eleanor had taken refuge, he was exhausted, dishevelled, and terrified he'd be too late. Her aunt met him at the door, her face grave. "She's upstairs, Your Grace. She's been asking for you. I didn't dare hope you'd come." "Of course I came," Adrian said roughly. "She's my wife. Where else would I be?" Eleanor's room was small, simple, and she looked impossibly fragile in the narrow bed. Her face was pale, her breathing laboured, and when she saw him in the doorway, tears spilled down her cheeks. "You came," she whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Adrian crossed to the bed, taking her hand. It felt impossibly delicate in his, as if she were already slipping away. "Eleanor, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you wait until I was dying?" She managed a weak smile. "Pride, I suppose. Stupidity. Fear that you'd come out of obligation rather than love." "I came out of love," Adrian said fiercely. "Only love. Always love." He climbed into the bed beside her, gathering her carefully into his arms. She felt too light, too insubstantial, and terror clawed at his chest. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, "for leaving, for wasting the time we could have had together, for believing that my inability to give you children made me less worthy of your love." "You were never less worthy," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "You were always everything, Eleanor. Always." They lay like that for hours, holding each other, speaking in whispers, trying to compress 2 years of separation into whatever time remained. Eleanor told him about Scotland, about the quiet life she'd built, about the loneliness that had haunted every moment. Adrian told her about Ravenswood, about the modest but sustainable life he'd created, about the emptiness of their home without her in it. "We wasted so much time," Eleanor said sadly. 2 years we could have spent together." "Then we won't waste another moment," Adrian said. "However long you have, days, weeks, we'll spend it together, as husband and wife, as we always should have been." Over the next 3 weeks, Adrian never left Eleanor's side. He read to her, held her through the pain, wiped her fevered brow. They talked about their brief time together, about the life they might have had if circumstances had been different. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor asked one night, her voice barely audible. "Marrying me? Losing everything for a woman who couldn't give you the one thing that mattered?" "I regret nothing," Adrian said fiercely. "If I could go back, knowing everything, the pain, the loss, the grief, I would still choose you. Every time, Eleanor. I would always choose you." She smiled, and in that smile, he saw the ghost of the fierce, intelligent woman he'd fallen in love with. "I would choose you too, even knowing how it ends, even knowing we'd have so little time." On a cold March morning, with Adrian's arms around her and his voice in her ear whispering words of love, Eleanor Blackwell drew her last breath. Adrian buried her in the small churchyard near the cottage, under a tree that would bloom white flowers each spring. He stood at her grave for hours, unable to move, unable to accept that she was truly gone. He'd lost everything: the fortune, the future, the woman he loved. The promise he'd made to a dying man had led him here, to this cold Scottish hillside, mourning a wife who'd believed she wasn't enough. But as Adrian finally turned to leave, as the sun set behind the mountains and cast long shadows across Eleanor's grave, he realized something. He didn't regret it. Any of it. He'd had Eleanor, even if only briefly. He'd known her love, her laughter, her brilliant mind and generous heart. He'd held her in his arms and called her wife. He'd experienced a depth of love that most people never found in a lifetime. The price had been everything. But what he'd received in return, those precious months with Eleanor, had been worth it. He returned to Ravenswood alone, to the estate they'd fought so hard to preserve. It was smaller now, more modest, but it was still standing, still home. And every day for the rest of his life, Adrian would walk through the gardens Eleanor had loved, sit in the library where they'd first talked, and sleep in the bed they'd shared. He never remarried, never even considered it, because there was only one Duchess of Ravenswood who mattered, only one woman who'd owned his heart completely. And though she was gone, though their time together had been brutally short and marked by more sorrow than joy, Adrian would not trade a single moment of it. He'd promised a dying man he would protect his daughter. What he hadn't known, what James Whitmore could never have anticipated, was that in protecting Eleanor, Adrian would lose his heart completely, and in losing her, he would lose everything else that had ever mattered. But he would also gain something precious: the knowledge that he had loved and been loved in return, fully and completely with no reservations. That love had cost him a fortune, an heir, and eventually the woman herself. But it had also given him the only thing worth having: a life that had meant something, a love that had been real. And in the end, that was the only promise that truly mattered, the one they'd made to each other in the brief time they'd had, to love completely and without reservation, no matter the cost. Even if that cost was everything. What did you think of Adrian and Eleanor's tragic love story? Could love truly conquer all when faced with such impossible circumstances, or were they doomed from the start? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel for more tales of love, loss, and the sacrifices we make for those we cherish. And don't forget to like this video. It helps us bring you more stories of the human heart in all its complexity. Thank you for listening to this journey through love and loss. Until next time, may you hold tight to those you love, for we never know how much time we truly have.